So our conversation today, I'm Ryan Burns, Director of Corporate Communication, and I'm joined by your very own sales engineer, Ryan Mann. I think this is the second or third time that Ryan has joined us on some of our webinars, but he is the go-to person when it comes to this specific conversation. And I think before we came off the mute, you mentioned that you recognized that the account managers were on the call. What was your comment about the account managers being on the call today?
Well, I talk to them all on the phone all the time, and I don't think any of them have really ever seen my face. So here you go.
Hi. All right, great team in Springfield with us today. So let's go ahead and start this off. Where are we taking this conversation when it comes to a pre-sale LAN assessment? When we go on the road and when we meet with clients, this is the number one issue, the number one topic that comes up is the delivery of the service and the tactical and the technical execution on site often presents, when we have a challenge or when we have an obstacle, it's usually somewhere within the LAN or the local area network, and the role that the assessment plays is critical in properly diagnosing the ideal setup to deliver that perfect customer experience. So that's what we're going to take this conversation today. What does that LAN consultation look like? What types of things should be looking at, questions you should be asking, as well as the wide area network, the WAN analysis, and then the all-important site survey. When you are on site, what are you looking for? So those are the big bucket topics or conversations we're going to have today with Ryan. At the end of this call, where I'm hoping we land is you'll have a better understanding of what those major milestones are for the LAN assessment. You'll have a better understanding of how to effectively consult your prospects or your existing customers on how hosted UC will work within their network, and you'll have a better understanding of how hosted UC can affect the performance of their existing network. So let's dive right into this first conversation point and look at the initial LAN consultation. And let's turn it over to Ryan to get his thoughts on where you take this initial LAN conversation.
So when I first enter into a LAN environment, one of the really important things, almost one of the primarily important things I want to check on is what kind of equipment is there? What kind of network are we going to be moving into? I like to find out everything from the WAN termination, if it's a Time Warner, Verizon, AT&T, whatever the circuit is, or if it's provided by one of our partners. I'd like to know what kind of a terminating equipment there is there. Inside that, there's usually a router, firewall, or a combination, and switches, and then there's the configuration drop from the switches to the phones, either single drop or dual drop, depending on how it's actually put together. It's good to note what kinds of devices are there, not specifically if they're PoE capable, so you know if you need power supplies or not for the devices. If they are going to be single drop, are they doing VLANs? Do they have that capability? And that really kind of depends on how many seats are really going to be driven for whatever LAN environment we're going into. Model numbers, firmwares are all important information to document and to get kind of put down so that if you have to come back to that LAN for any issue later on in the past, you know what you're working with. Apart from that, there's also a level of familiarity, and if you're making notes on each LAN that you go into, you can say, okay, I've seen this configuration before, like with SonicWall, and generally speaking, turning off ALG, things like that, which doesn't happen all the time, but depending on what firmware they're on, they might need to turn it off or on, like I said, depending on the firmware. So it's really just a recognition of what they actually have there as far as device components go and their capability of managing the logical environment as well.
You mentioned a router. What role does a router play, and more specifically, how important is the router in this initial consultation?
It's really very important. Once again, depending on the level of usage in the network itself, a router, it does exactly what it's called. It routes traffic. It routes traffic outbound. It routes traffic inbound. It does NATing. It does a whole bunch of different things. One thing that I like to make sure in the bigger networks that we move into is that they've implemented some sort of class of service to accomplish quality of service facing the WAN.
Do we have any, is there a recommendation that we typically put forth in terms of routers to maybe look at or routers to stay away from? Is that something that our partners can possibly consult on as well?
Well, ANPI has a list of routers that we have experience with, and on the list there are firmware and what problems we had, what settings may have needed to be adjusted to get those to work, and some to just avoid altogether. There's no real general avoid this altogether, because you never know what's going to happen with the next firmware release. So it's always good to do a little bit of investigation, but there are some in the past, and you can check against the firmware and router manufacturer from that list, and these are just the experiences that ANPI has had.
And I know several of y'all have deployed some of these instances at your client sites. I know I think I had conversations with Matt Johnson about stuff like this. So if any of you have any other, hey, include this in your consultation, or make sure you look at this, we'd love to hear what your observations, what your experiences are as well. Share them with us. Come off mute if you want, or share them with us in the chat box. A situation that you encountered, or maybe a router conversation that you encountered, anything that you think we could add to this list that you could share with the group, that would also be really, really appreciated as well. We can make this kind of a learning session too. So next, let's move into this concept of QoS, or quality of service. So conversations that I know that you and I have had in the past, Ryan, QoS kind of seems to be kind of a tricky concept. You've contributed a lot to our blog conversations around the importance of QoS. Define for us what QoS is and how it can be accomplished.
Well, QoS is really it's a strategy of different methodologies to accomplish prioritization of interesting traffic. And by interesting, obviously we want to talk about voice. We want to protect voice above everything else, apart from the control mechanisms to keep the circuit stable. The reason we do this is because a lot of people, file transfers typically use TCP, and that's going to try to use as much bandwidth as possible. And if you come up to a point where there's contention, or the bandwidth, your highway is full, your pipe is full, then you want to be able to have that router or that traffic say, hey, voice takes priority over everything else. So we want to make sure that there's enough room for that, so our call quality isn't affected when somebody does a large file transfer, decides they're going to start watching YouTube or Hulu or whatever it is.
So let me stop you there. So you've got a pretty good analogy that I've heard you explain to people during some retraining sessions before.
Sure. Around
contention, and I think you used like a highway traffic analogy.
Yeah.
You broached that, but I think this is good to expand on.
So yeah, there's a couple. Highway is one that I like to use. It's like looking at emergency vehicles on the highway. You have heavy traffic in the mornings on the tollways and the highways and whatever. But if you have an emergency vehicle like an ambulance or a fire truck or a policeman, generally if people can get out of the way, they will, right? Or otherwise they have the shoulder that they can ride on, but nobody else can, right? So they have that priority over the rest of the general traffic of people trying to get to work. I think it's pretty important for me to get to work, but that guy's going to save somebody's life, or try to help direct traffic so it moves a little bit smoother. So it's a good way to think about, hey, this traffic is more important than everything else. Another way to think about it is maybe priority access when you go to take a flight. You get that priority access, you can move to the front of the line pretty quick because you make a lot of flights. So you've gained this privilege to be able to move ahead before everybody else can.
Good. I think analogies are really helpful in helping people understand that kind of concept. It was for me at least. So going back to a previous conversation we had around initial LAN consultations or initial LAN analysis, I asked the group, what conversations or what observations or best practices did they had, and validate this for me if you could. Matt Johnson says what he likes to do is establish a 20-minute test call on the end user environment. Why would he do that, and what benefit would that have? So at the 10-minute mark, ANPI will send out a SIP message that will make sure the call is still valid. A lot of times we'll run into a few, to name one, sonic wall firewalls that they don't have the UDP timer set correctly. You have to set it at least above 300 seconds, so you get, or at 600 seconds, so you can get that 5-minute or that 10-minute mark. The reason we do this, and the reason we want to do a test call, as Matt says, 20 minutes, I say I shoot for 15 at least, so 20 is good, is because we want to make sure that call is going to stay up after that 10-minute mark, or make sure it's not, maybe a couple seconds later or whatever the deal is, right? So a lot of times I like to have
that test call up and be running and talking on that call and prepare the people that I'm talking to, that this is what I expect to happen if this setting needs to be adjusted somewhere in your network. And then when it happens, say, there we go. We've already troubleshot our first problem for voice traffic.
Yeah, Matt, thanks for sharing that best practice, and Ryan, thanks for kind of validating that approach. Okay. All right, so let's kind of transition this just a little bit into this idea of jitter and latency, because I know they're closely related to the QoS conversation. So I've got a couple open-ended questions up there. Is jitter and latency high on the provider network? What kind of experience do you have, or what are we looking at here?
So generally speaking, provider networks don't have high jitter and latency. A lot of times the links are controlled, they're monitored actively by whoever the provider is. Generally, you'll see outside of your footprint, you may have to talk to whoever the provider is, but within your footprint, you can tell pretty quickly if there's any kind of jitter or latency between yourself and your terminating equipment at a customer's location. One good thing to be sure of if you are outside of your footprint and looking at another provider is you want to make sure that that WAN provider is able to handle the issues that arise with jitter and latency, able to go out and troubleshoot, able to detect it, things like that. And that may be a conversation that you need to include them in, or the provider in, along with the customer when it comes into moving into that environment.
Okay.
So generally, the ISP, and that's why we have this slide up, is one thing you want to make sure of. And a lot of the testing that we're going to talk about here shortly will go through a few steps to check and see where they're at today, and if we need to involve that provider to take a look at and see if there is an issue on their network at all. Like I said, make sure that they're prepared to deal with those conditions if they arise.
We kind of introduced the idea of testing. I know that since the last time we had this call together, you've kind of introduced us to some testing tools that you like to use. So let's go ahead and share what some of those testing tools are. When you sent me this slide, I thought, wow, that is the craziest looking website I've ever seen. This is not our website. We did not design this page.
No, this is Ookla.
But this is what page you use.
Right, yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's already free tools that are out there. I didn't pay for this. It's a free thing. You just go and you can run a quick test, and you can specify, and you can run a quick test, and you can specify which server you want to go to. Our main SBCs are in New York and LA, so if you want to test to a server in those locations, you can. I've gotten rid of our IP address here just for our own privacy purposes, but this tells you I'm just going to a Dallas server here, just a random one, and this is just to give you kind of a readout of what I'm seeing. This was when I was connected to Wi-Fi before I actually plugged my computer into the hard network, so you can see kind of what we're seeing here, bandwidth up and down. If they think they have a symmetrical with their provider, then you can actually verify that information using this tool here. This will also give you the latency to whichever server you choose to go to. And those are really the two things that you want to test with speed tests is bandwidth and latency. And if we move forward here.
Before we do that,
okay,
you've got some notes in here I think would be helpful. Bandwidth. Define for us what the bandwidth is.
Sure. Bandwidth is it's just the carrying capacity. I've had a lot of people, a couple RFPs come through and say, what is the minimum bandwidth required? Well, a toll quality G711 call is 80 kilobits per second. So how many concurrent calls are you expecting? What other data is there on the network? Those are a couple of questions you really want to look at when you're talking about bandwidth and capability of running many calls over a circuit.
Those were two great questions, and you went through them real quick. I loved them, actually. So we know it's 80
kilobits per second for a G711 call, and that's toll quality. And then
you say you had two follow-up questions after that.
Oh, okay. So how many concurrent calls do they have?
How many concurrent calls does the business expect to get into their at one time? So let me stop you there for a second.
Sure.
So realistic parameters. I mean, if you've got 50 employees in an office or 20 employees in an office, do we think there would be 20 concurrent calls going on?
I don't expect to ever see that many unless you're looking at a call center environment. You might see a higher concurrent call situation going on. Generally speaking, I like to look to standard as at least 1 to 6 ratio. There's going to be one call for every 6 devices we have.
Okay.
But if you want to be more conservative, you can move to 1 to 4, and I've seen 1 to 3 for like call center environments, things like that. So I don't expect, if you're going to have 20 phones, that you need 80 kilobits per second times 20 phones.
Okay.
You just need to have enough to account for the concurrent calls that you're going to have, which is how many calls at any given time. And that's another reason why you want to run these tests at a specific time of the day. You want to make sure you run them at the busy times of the day so that you get an accurate availability of network resources during those busy times when data is traversing over their connection.
So the other question you had was, what other applications do they have running on the network? Is that it?
Well, okay, so what other resources are going to be using that WAN connection?
What resources might those be?
File transfers, if somebody, Hulu or YouTube, or somebody's looking up one of our ANPI videos on YouTube, right? So there's going to be a little bit of traffic going across, and you can look at that traffic depending on what your circuit size should be. You can run this test and see how much is being utilized right now, how much is available right now.
Okay. You've got one other test here that I know you mentioned you like to try, or you'd like to use. This is pingtest.net.
Yes, the ping test, which I lost my paper, but that's fine. So there's the pingtest.net here. This one, it's very similar, almost the same. It's also run by Ookla. This one will give you a readout for jitter, and you can see and packet loss and latency. You can see in the packet loss in the top left there. I don't have Java on my laptop, or it's not updated, so it's not going to give me that reading for packet loss, but that is available if you have Java set up. Once again, it gives you the latency, which you want to make sure is over 200 milliseconds, or I'm sorry, not over, less than 200 milliseconds, so you can make sure you can keep that call up. The jitter is just the packet order that they arrive in. One thing to note here when you're going through discussions is the jitter buffer that ANPI has, and I know white label you can say the jitter that Futiva or the jitter that Ben Lomit or whoever has. We have a jitter buffer that we put on there, which will delay the audio up to 120 milliseconds, so that it gives those packets time to reorder when they arrive at each end. The other metric that shows up here is the MOS score, mean opinion score. It's underneath the B star. It says 4.34, right? So yeah, there you go. So that if it's above 2.5, anything above 2.5 is really it's still quality. It's imperceptible if it's a difference between 2.5 and 3.5. The human ear can't really tell the difference. So that's something to keep note of. And I haven't seen it myself go low. I did this at my house too, and I didn't see anything lower than 4.34 myself. But if you do see that, then that might be indicative of jitter and latency on their network. So it'd be a good thing to note and maybe investigate a little bit further. Go back and run some more testing, maybe just a straight up ping test from a command prompt out to Google DNS or wherever you're going to want to run it to. So that is, oh, it's on the back, that's why.
So those are two tests that you rely on heavily, the pingtest.net and the speedtest.net. And as we progress through this conversation, I would love to hear from the rest of the team, internal, external, and partners as well, any tests that you are also found to be useful. I'd love to hear what those are. We can share those with the rest of the group, put them in the chat box in the lower left-hand corner, because they'll actually serve as a link if somebody wanted to go out to it from there. Now, a little bit more in terms of device testing. I know that you also have recommendations about once you've done your latency, your jitter, your packet loss testing, and your LAN testing, it's just you like to actually start testing some of the devices and some of the soft clients as well. Is that right?
Right, and this is kind of what Matt brought up earlier, running that phone call either on a soft client loaded onto a laptop that you have plugged into their network, or an actual phone that you're plugging in there. And this gives you the ability to show that the network is already available to their LAN. And it also enables you to run past that 10-minute mark to the 15 or even 20-minute mark to verify that the settings are already primed for them to be able to make calls, at least on that one phone, right? So then at that point, it's just an evaluation of whether or not their network can handle the rest of the calls.
Let me pause for 1 second. I got a chat in the lower left-hand corner that we got lost by some folks. That's okay. Jan or Michael Heege, since y'all are right up front. Okay. So Matt call back in. I got validation that we're actually still live from Springfield, so I think we're good. Sorry, Matt. And Amy says so. Amy, you're down in San Antonio, I think. Okay, cool. Let's keep rolling. Thanks, Scott. All right, let's keep rolling. We're good. So, and I apologize for interrupting you. Anything else you need to cover off on these with these testing software client identified?
No. Basically, obviously, the obvious things you want to check for on that call. Make sure you got good two-way audio. The calls don't drop and the registrations happen. Make sure you don't have NAT issues or anything like that going. That's the only other thing I wanted to note on there. But that pretty much wraps up that part of the testing.
Okay. So the second major milestone in this kind of pre-sales consultation is the WAN analysis, or the wide area network analysis. And you set us up nicely with the top three things here that really need to be determined during the WAN assessment activity. So walk us through what those key three things are.
Well, like we discussed, the bandwidth is important. It's important generally because you want to be able to have the capacity for not only their data traffic, but their voice traffic. And then that's why we talk about QoS and COS as well, so that we can account for everything that's going on there. A lot of times people won't complain too much about their internet traffic being slow because it is that TCP, and they contain redirects and mechanisms to keep that data safe. It may appear a little bit slower, a little bit latent, but the voice traffic is much more important. So being able to have the capacity large enough to account for not only their data traffic but the voice traffic is a very important piece of the puzzle. The connection type is important to note because we want to see what kind of issues we may have with those connections, if it's an Ethernet or if it's cable, if it's fiber, whatever it is. And a lot of times in our partners area, they'll be able to have that information ready for us. And another thing to note with the bandwidth, sorry, I wanted to go backtrack just a little bit here, is that a lot of times our carriers, and what I'm hearing from a lot of my partners is that they will, they usually give a little bit more bandwidth than they'll actually need. And I don't want to really call it overselling, but bandwidth is so cheap these days that it's not really a price point at that point. It's just something else that they can use to augment and protect that traffic. That's why you don't really see a whole lot in that network environment.
So it sounds like the delivery style sounds like it could be influenced by this last point here. The delivery style might be influenced by how calls make it out to the internet.
Not necessarily. It's really just once the connection gets from your LAN IP and then gets converted onto a fiber, and it usually has to go through a media converter to do something like that, right? So you want to be aware of that situation in case of anything might arise. As far as errors between those different devices. Obviously, you add more devices, you add more points of failure. So you want to be able to detect that sort of thing.
And when we're talking about delivery style or delivery mechanisms, this is kind of how we introduce the idea of an over-the-top delivery style or delivery approach. Help us understand what over-the-top delivery or OTT is and how it influences the delivery of a hosted UCaaS solution. Well,
over the top, we like to leave a little bit general because that's exactly what it is. It's over the top of any network. If you have MPLS, we can write over your MPLS. If you have a customer who's not comfortable with going over the open internet and they have MPLS, they can tie into us into one of our nodes and basically incorporate us into that MPLS environment so they can keep that high level of security. I can go over the top of open internet. We can go over the top of any kind of connection that they have, as long as they can get data to their site and they can get to our IP address on the wide area network, then the phone system will work.
So I know there might be some misconceptions or misunderstandings around QoS or quality of service as it relates to the public internet or delivery over the top. Can you talk just a little bit about maybe some of the QoS mechanisms that are in place or how QoS plays into an over-the-top delivery approach? Sure.
Yeah, that's one of the questions I get asked a lot about is how do I maintain QoS over the open internet, right? Sorry. So I learned I came from an MPLS environment myself. That's where I got a lot of my experience. And I thought the be-all, end-all of QoS was having DSCP tagging on my packets. So that's good in an environment where you are contended, where you have a lot of different resources trying to use the same connection. The reason you see that is when you look at the difference between your LAN and your WAN connection. A lot of times you'll have gigabit connections on all of your devices on site, or 100 meg for the phones or whatever it is, and then you'll have a 10 meg or a 5 meg going on to your provider, or even an asymmetrical 10.1 or whatever it is with Time Warner, depending on what kind of connection they have. But that is going to be the primary point of contention, and that's where I see a lot of the issues come up when people start to talk about QoS. Over the open internet itself, a lot of times you have gigabit connections, 10 gigabit connections as backbones from, between carriers. We have a 10 gigabit backbone across the nation between our two primary hosted sites, LA and New York. So there's not generally going to be a lot of contention on those connections. And once again, they are monitored so that you have all of your providers checking those. And usually once you get to a certain level, it's 50 or 60 or 70%, whatever it is for whichever provider it is, they'll usually augment that and add a little bit more bandwidth, or traffic will reroute to a different destination if one route is contended.
Matt, I see your comment. It's going to tie into where we're going to take this conversation in a couple of minutes, so it's a perfect, you're a couple slides ahead of us, so it's perfect actually. So the next major milestone after your WAN assessment is conducting a site survey, and Matt, this is kind of where I think your activities tie back in as well, is what do you actually do when you actually go on site? If you do a truck roll, you actually visit the client site, business site, what type of activities are you actually engaged in?
Well, I think that's what we went over first. We might need to reorder these a little bit, but what we would do is basically we want to log all the equipment they have. We want to write down routers and terminating equipment they have for the WAN, and switches and configurations if they're VLAN capable, things like that. We want to make sure we have all the physical documentation done, and then we go towards logical documentation. Are they already using class of service and VLANs and things like that to prioritize that voice traffic? After that point, and that's why we run those tests to check the WAN link as well as the ping test and the speedtest.net, so that we can verify from an endpoint on their LAN, what does the network look like from that point. Let's put a phone in there and test it. What does that phone call look like? How does that sound? We use the same thing here at the office here in Frisco. We have Cisco ASA, SIP ALG is turned on here. So that's another thing to note. It's just, it really depends on what kind of equipment they have and what kind of experience you're going to have with that equipment. You may need to be prepared to go into this equipment and make setting changes depending on what happens with your phone calls.
So in these activities, let me back up to Matt's comment here. Matt Johnston made a comment that using Lucid charts or some of a Visio type program, he says, is a great way to document the LAN WAN and design call flows for end users.
Right.
He also says it gives you a starting point for troubleshooting in the future, and he says that he lives by Lucid. So let me ask, Ryan, let me turn to you on this. Is this the point in the conversation where you start documenting things either in a Visio or a Lucid type of arrangement?
I love Lucid Chart. I use it all the time. Tadeo and I have a lot of different network drawings that we've put together for different folks. Lucid Charts is great. When I'm on site, it's a little bit more hairy to have my laptop out and trying to put different icons in different places, things like that. But so I take pen to paper at that point, or sticky note like Mr. Tadeo does. But any means we have to get that information that we need written down. And once you've gone through, usually if you have a checklist to go through, router, switch, terminating equipment, phone configuration, VLANs, and go through logical, you just kind of go down a list of things. And once you have it, in your brain a couple times, and then you can just get everything written down, take it back to the shop, and like Matt said, put it down on Lucid Charts so you have an actual documentation and a date, and this is what happened at this point, this is what they had when I went out there, and this is the documentation I have for all that.
Okay. Good. All right, we've had a pretty good conversation here. We've got some good insights and some good sharing going on amongst the team. Any other questions that we need to clear the deck from maybe Springfield with the account managers or some of the other partners on the call? Anything else? Star one will bring up with mute. All right. So hopefully, now that we've kind of started our merging into the exit lane, hopefully at the end of this call we've got a better understanding of what those major milestones are and so what some of those key activities are in terms of the LAN assessment as well as the WAN assessment activities, and you've got a better sense of really how to effectively consult with your prospects or your clients on how a hosted UC will work in an optimal fashion on their network and still deliver that ideal customer experience. At the conclusion of today's call, we've got a nice resource toolkit for you. We have today's presentation, which has some speaker notes in it and some slides for you to repurpose for your own needs if you'd like to. A recording of the webinar and these links will be provided to you in the follow-up email. In the next few weeks, where are we headed with our next conversations? We'll be looking at an Atlas conversation around customer lifecycle management, 316, customer administration portal conversations, and then the end of the month, additional products or solutions, a nice open placeholder for our conversations at that point. So anything else from the rest of the team from Frisco or from Springfield or Houston or San Antonio? All right, hey Kurt, good to see you again, man. Hope things are going well for you. All right, guys, thanks a lot for calling in, and we will see you. Ryan, thank you.
No problem.
Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.